Okay, gang, here we are back at the color collage. I'm Cappy from Always in Stitches. If you've been following this process, you know we are winding down. It's kind of exciting. We're doing the color collage block of the month. It's a 10-part block of the month with Nancy Rink. And we are ready to do the 9th portion of this project, which is sashing and setting, which, whew, that means you've made all your blocks. And my center block isn't here at the shop. I have to move everything from my studio at home to here, so the center block isn't here, but it turned out lovely. For those of you who made the center block last month, it was so fun. It really was. We had lots of applique, and the way the block came together, it was just a fun one to make, and you made your borders. So I'm not displaying those now, but I know you did those last month. If you've got questions about those, go back to that video. But now we're ready to put the sashing on and the cornerstones between the sashing and kind of start setting things up. So fabric this month, we're going to use this, what's called the, what do they call this? Well, first you use Collage, so when I looked at this fabric, what I realized is it's a collage of all the fabrics in the line. So isn't that fun? I mean, every single fabric that's in the line is printed in this in a different scale. So this is what we use to do the setting squares. So you're going to cut, and you have plenty left of that, by the way. You cut big squares out of that, and everything you cut this month, cut exactly to the dimensions she gives you. We're not doing any more of those B squares, so we don't have to adjust. But you make a great big square, and then you cut it in half to get these diagonal squares like this. So you get half of a diagonal. Or a quarter, twice diagonal. So you cut a big square and then you cut it from side to side so that you get these 4 corners. And then you use these for your setting squares. And then in the white laurel, which is this fabric, which is just really, really pretty, you're going to cut some strips and make squares out of those, because those are what go on the corners of the other diagonals that you sewed. So you sew it on. So when I sew it on, it looks like this. Sew that square on that tip, and then cut that off, and I press that back. So that's what you're going to do with those 2 pieces. Super simple. Everything we're doing today, you've done previously in these blocks. It's not a new process. And then the other 2 pieces that you cut from are the navy that was for the border. You're going to cut squares out of that. Cut exactly the size square that they say to cut. And then you also, out of this one, cut what end up being sashing. This is the gray framing. Cut exactly the dimension it says. So what's going to happen is these are going to be your cornerstones, and this is going to be your sashing. So when you look at it, you're going to have cornerstones, sashing, setting pieces, and then there's other setting pieces too. So that's basically what you're cutting out. You can see I have my squares here, I have my sashing here, I have my corners here, and I've already sewn on the setting squares some of them. Now you have another dimension for the corners, because these 4 setting squares, let me just show you right here. These 4 corners, you do not put the white tip on it. Okay, so don't get that confused. And these 4 corners are a different size than the one you put the tips on. So when you're putting your pieces together, you'll have, I think, 16 that are shaped like this, and then you just have the 4 that are a little smaller that go in your actual corners of your quilt. So when you turn the page and look at this picture that she shows of how everything comes together, what I want you to do, and what I did, was I kind of sectioned this off so I could see how I'm making the pieces. And she shows you how she has them sorted. There's like white lines between them, and if you sew them that way, it works. When you see a quilt set on point, I think sometimes people go, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard to set it on point. Well, it's really not. They're just rows. You know, if I square it up, that's just rows, but they're just going sideways. I mean, kind of at an angle. It's still a row. You're still sewing a row together. So this row has a block in the center, a setting triangle on either side, and a point on here. Now here's the other thing I want you to look at. This side is a mirror image of this side. So when I make this row, I'm also going to make this row. And when I make this row, I turn right around and make this row. Same thing all the way through. So every time I make a row on this side, I'm going to make the mirror image row on the other side. And that helps me keep track of where I'm at, and I can mark those off as I go. When I get to these pieces here, I'm going to sew this partial row and this partial row, same thing here, that one and this one and this one match, so they're always opposite. And I'll sew that whole unit together, sew it to the center, sew this whole unit together, and sew it to the center. And that makes this very manageable. I think, you know, when, I love quilts set on point, but I think sometimes people are overwhelmed by the way to sew them together. But it's not hard. You just break it into little bites. That's how you eat an elephant, is one bite at a time. And this is very, very manageable if you look at the picture. And like I said, I've circled it. Now, I've used my friction pen because when I'm done making this, I'll probably put the heat to that so I can erase it and see. Let's just show them how that works. So see, there's lines on here. I always use a friction pen to mark all my patterns. And then, I just think this is the coolest trick. It's gone. It's gone. And so now when I go back and do it again, and it's got kind of a film on it, but that doesn't matter. I can't write on it now because it's hot. But now I could go back and I could recircle everything that I just did. And make sure that I know what I'm doing. But just remember, you're always working two. So if I work that one, I'm going to do this one. If I work this row, I'm going to work that row. Then I'm going to work this row when I work that row, and that row when I work this row, and then that all goes to the center. So break it down into bite-sized pieces. When you do your sashing pieces, let's go over here to the sewing machine, Peter, if we could. So your sashings come onto the sides. In a perfect world, my points match exactly, and yes, most of the time they do. Sometimes they don't, but I'm cool with that. They're real close. On some of them, they're better than others, but this one you can see those points are pretty good. That one, it got sucked in. I'm over it. Here, when you sew these pieces onto the ends, your cornerstones, like that, be sure you get your pieces to nest. So when I press always to the white sashing. As long as you always press to this white part, you're going to be fine, because then they'll nest in together. And then that will go on the top of this, like that. See, that's going to go in there perfectly. Let me sew it real quick so you can see how it fits. And we'll just do this corner block. And it will be done. Because I've already done one side, now I can do the other. Now there are methods where you sew all these on just and then slice them, but she didn't have you do it that way. She actually has you sew every cornerstone and every sash, and that's fine too. It works. There. Okay, press to the sashing, not to the cornerstones. And if I press to the sashing on everything, then that means these are going to nest together. So see, there I get my nest. Nest to nest. And that's what's going to give me those sharp points. And nest to nest. So here we go. And this is a chance to use those fork pins that I've been talking about so much. And when I cut that big square, we do have a ruler that is just ginormous that is really helpful for that too.
It's my favorite ruler.
Yeah.
I used to think you were nuts. Like, why would you need a ruler that big?
Yeah.
And it's mine. That was my go-to.
It is. It's
I don't know how I quilted without it.
Yeah. It's
funny
like,
enough.
It's 22 by 22, and it's the best ruler. It really. I make a lot of bags, and for a lot of bags, you have to cut 18-inch squares, and so it's better to cut with a template on top of fabric than to measure it against your mat. When you use the mat to measure, sometimes you just don't get as good of a square. I'm kind of pirating this, but we'll be getting it done so you can see how it works, because I want you to see those setting pieces. When you put them on, there's a little bit of a trick to them. Okay. So there we go. Okay, so here we go. Now I've got this piece put on. So there's my cornerstones. I'm going to press it again to the sashing. Here's how we're going to put these corners on. So there's my block for the first side. And then the next piece we're going to put on. We got people in the background talking, so just the next piece we're going to put on, if you look at the pattern, it has this going on the side with the point down here and the piece here going with the point down. So here's what I'm going to do is lay these out like this, right there, okay? And I lay these pieces out so you can see them in advance so you know where they go, like that. And I'm going to sew these side pieces on first before I put my top corner on. You can't put the top corner on the other way around because your points won't come out just like you want them to. So put your sides on first and then the point. The rest of them pretty much go in a row, but this corner piece is kind of like that. So I'm going to sew this on, and I'm going to line this corner up with that corner. That's my square right there. And that gives me the overhang at the top. Okay. There we go. This is pretty simple. Okay. Same thing, I'm putting this one on the corner. They're pretty big chunks by this point. It goes pretty fast. You just don't have to line up with anything. Okay, there we go.
Okay, Jeffrey.
Okay, so now I have these side pieces in the center. So I'm still sewing a row, it's just these pieces are cut off on the corner. And I'm going to press that. Got this all twisted around in here. There we go. Press that point out. So see, now I've got these little overhangs out here, which I need. I have to have that little piece hanging out there in order for this to fit right. And then the next piece that goes on are the actual corners. And they go like this. And when you put that piece on, now you're going to see how it extends. That extends beyond that piece because I have to sew that in order to get my 1/4 inch. So when you have that hangover part, don't get anxious about that. That's what you want to see. That's the way it should be. And I think maybe that's what scares people about doing these corners like this, is you have dangly pieces hanging out that we're not used to. Quilters are used to things lining up square like that, but when you start putting these angled pieces on squares, you end up with danglies. The other thing you can do to make sure you get that exactly centered is fold this triangle in half, okay? Now if I cut it square, it's not a problem, but you know, we all make mistakes and things aren't exactly perfect sometimes. Fold this in half, okay, so I know I have the center of this and the center of this, and then lay those right on each other. And then I'm sure I'm getting that point in exactly the right spot. But if I've cut my triangles at the right size, I'm going to have the same overhang on both sides. But matching that center will help you get that exactly right again. And I just finger press it. I don't have to get it truly ironed. But that also helps you get that lined up, okay? But you should have hangovers. This is when it's good to have a hangover. And then the other thing, when I drop my needle down, and if I have my machine set at the right place, it lands exactly where those two come. I mean, that where this piece is hanging over that little bit, that's exactly a 1/4 inch from there to there. And when I drop my needle, I'll be able to tell that it's right on the money. I love it when it works. And then look, when I ended, it's right at that point. It's perfect. It's right where it's supposed to be. Love it, love it, love it, love it. That's why cutting matters. That's why using that template's a good idea and getting it cut. So now I have my nice space here, so when I put my binding on that edge, it's not going to take that point off. And that's what I want on both sides. Okay? And there's my corner. So you can see this one and this one are exactly the same piece. Okay? They go at opposite ends. But that's why I went ahead and made this one and this one at the same time. So now I can circle that one's done and this one's done basically right here. The next row I'm going to make will be this row, and there's this row. And then you sew those two rows together. And if you look at the dimensions, that's how she's done it. Then I'll make these two rows, which are the same. They're just reversed. One's going this way, one's going that way. So be sure when you put your setting triangles on, you get them in the right direction. And then I'll make these 4 pieces here and sew it together. So it assembles fairly simply. This picture's really good. Be sure that you take the time to think it through and make them in pairs. When you're sewing, if you know, okay, I made one, I have to make one just like it, just the opposite. Every row you make 2. And you have more than enough squares to do that. And you don't have to place these squares the way she did. If you have another layout that you like better, as far as maybe you don't want that green one in the corner, maybe you want this yellow one in the corner, you can do it however you want. You could do them random. This is how she set it up. Again, the pattern is an inspiration. It's your quilt. You can do what you want. When we were in our class here at the shop, this center square here, we noticed in one of the pictures she actually used this fabric in the center square instead of this floral, which I thought was interesting. If you don't want this for your sashing, you can use something else. It's your quilt. Make it what makes you happy. Really and truly, please make what makes you happy. But if you've not done it before, I would suggest following the directions because it's a little easier until you're ready to. You know, the first time you bake the cake, use the recipe. The second time you bake the cake, do what you want. But that's really it. Next month, we're going to go to the next part, which will be actually finishing the quilt. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we've come to the end of this almost. It's so amazing. The quilt is stunning. I will tell you, one of the staff members walked by when I was setting this up and she's like, oh my goodness, I hadn't seen that quilt done. And when she saw just that one corner, she's like, that's really, really pretty. So I think you're going to be very happy when you get your quilts finished. It's going to be so exciting to see you guys have them ready to go. And I appreciate you watching the videos. One more in November and then we're done. This could be a great Christmas gift for somebody if you can get it put together and quilted in time. So I appreciate you watching, and thanks to Peter for being behind the camera and holding it up for as long as he does, and we'll see you next time. Have a great stitchy day. Bye-bye.